Diversity can be the harbinger of hope. Inclusion can be the bridge towards acceptance, and equity and equality can serve as the keys to possibilities. However, for far too many African American athletes and African Americans in general, there are still glaring disparities which deny them access to social justice. However, there is one new organization who's on a mission to change just that. Athletes and Advocates for Social Justice in Sports was created in June of 2020 as a result of athletes' international response to racial unrest. It's a reincarnation of the Student Athletes Human Rights Project, a former 501c3 which advocated for the rights of college athletes at UNC, Rutgers, Colorado State, Wisconsin, and more. The organization's executive director, Emmett Gill, joined me this week to discuss how far we've come, the progress we've made, and how far we still need to go when it comes to the full inclusion of African American athletes and athletes in general when it comes to social justice issues. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Emmett, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program. And I'm excited to talk to you today about athletes and advocates, social justice in sports. Great to be with you this afternoon, and thank you so very much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, Emmett, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of our discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion in sports, I'm wondering if you can tell our viewers a little bit about the organization you run and the mission you hope to serve.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. So, Athletes and Advocates for Social Justice in Sports was created shortly after the social unrest and racial unrest that we experienced in early 2021. And basically what we want to do is we want to advocate for issues that impact athletes at the high school, collegiate, professional level, as well as advocate for issues that are important to athletes. You know, for example, now criminal justice reform is a very important topic in the professional athletic community. And so issues that impact athletes as well as those that are of interest to athletes.
Tell me, how do you think the social justice movement and athletes in general have sort of commingled together over the last 15 months to advance the discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion in sports?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that athletes both on the professional level and the collegiate level have done an outstanding job of commingling sports and social justice. You know, on the professional level, I think you've got a couple of ways that it is happening. One, through the professional sports organizations, you know, and the governing leagues. For example, you've got the Players Coalition with the NFL. Then you've got several teams in the NFL who have developed social justice committees, and they are moving the meter. You know, legislation in Denver, legislation in Pennsylvania, which they have helped to move. And then you've got individual efforts, for example, in the WNBA, you've got the efforts of Maya Moore, in terms of having, who's now, I believe, her spouse, and was incarcerated, freed from it, from prison. And so I think they've done an excellent job. And then on the collegiate level, we have a number of Division I, Division II, and Division III schools where you have now, Black athlete associations, or, associations for athletes of color. And so it's happening, it's happening. And this is probably, I'd have to check with Dr. Harry Edwards. But this is probably what I would say the beginning of the sixth wave of activism, in sports. And, there's only more to come.
And I know a big reason your organization was formed in the first place was what happened tragically with George Floyd. So I'm wondering if you can comment on your opinion on how that changed the sports landscape and the appetite for activism.
Yeah, Kevin. I mean, I think it was just tremendous, to see, the video of Mr. Floyd suffering his death at the hands of a Minnesota police officer. Oftentimes we hear about it, but those rare opportunities where we get to see the whole unfortunate event to play out. And I think, for a lot of us, and I don't know if you experience the same thing, but, we could put ourselves in that position. And I think certainly, professional athletes, because, they've got the bling, they've got the cars, they've got the clothes, they can become subject to certain types of profiling, but it wasn't just the athletes, it's the coaches. I'm sure that there's some coaches, whether they're in the NFL or NBA, or, they're Olympic coaches or WNBA or Major League Soccer, or men of color, men and women of color, when a police car pulls up behind them, that can promote a certain anxiety, that can cause a sense of uneasiness. And so I think it moved the sports world because we could easily put ourselves in that position. And life is fragile, right? It's interesting because athletes are invincible, but life is still fragile. And when you're talking about police involved killings, you have men and women who are law enforcement officers. They carry guns, they carry tasers, they've got, other means at their disposal. And so you're not invincible anymore. And I think lastly that, we've seen some great examples of motherhood and fatherhood in sports as of late. And I think that now some of these athletes are thinking about, what are we leaving behind, in terms of an infrastructure for fairness and safety for our children, not only their children, but their fans' children, and the children who follow them, and their fans. And so I think it moved them in a lot of ways. And, unfortunately, it had to happen. Mr. Floyd's death is having a tremendous impact on social justice movements in our country.
Gill says, in order to capitalize on the positive momentum for change that the tragic events of George Floyd's death sparked, it's important to remember to continue to educate athletes on the process.
Well, I think that one of the key things that we have to do, Kevin, is we have to continue to sort of educate athletes about the process, right? So I teach a course at George Mason University called Organizing and Advocating for Change. And it's a summer school course, right? And so I'm teaching some things like, written communication and op-eds and action alerts and letters to the editor. And my point being is that we have to begin to impart in athletes the strategies to pursue social justice, right? Because we know that there are different strategies. There are a plethora of strategies that you can be engaged in. But the other two things actually, is I think that we need to teach them leadership skills, and continue to enhance their leadership skills, right? We've got some great point guards and quarterbacks and pitchers out there. Nonetheless, they can still enhance their leadership skills, so that they can perform on the field of social justice. And I think the third thing, Kevin, is that what we have to deal with is past trauma, right? I mean, athletes probably, and I'm a former college athlete, probably have some uneasiness about entering these circles, whether it's, entering the Capitol, or whether it's speaking in front of a group of legislators, or, trying to reach out and engage in discourse with some policymakers. I mean, that can be an anxiety provoking, and in some cases it can be a traumatic experience, because they're outside of their space. And so leadership, teaching advocacy and organizational skills, and dealing with anxiety and uneasiness and trauma that can come with some of this work is important, because at the end of the day, Kevin, there's going to be pushback, right? When our college athletes stood up, and I'm trying to remember the circumstance. It happened with the Missouri football boycott. It happened with UCLA's football team and their COVID standards this past year. But there's going to be pushback. So how do you deal with that pushback? So to your point, to further it, we've got to arm them with certain skills so they can be effective in what they want to do.
And I'm also curious to ask you about the comments of Doc Rivers when he was still with the Clippers when the video of George Floyd came out, and what he had to say about certain inequities when it comes to the Black community and sort of how we close the gap. I'm wondering your thoughts on his comments then and how far we've come.
I think that we're closing gaps in certain spaces, Kevin. I really do. I think that we are. And I'll just speak outside of, sports. I mean, if we look at, Madam Vice President, or, we look at the myriad of firsts that are happening with the Biden administration, or, politically speaking, with governors, with presidents of universities, we're seeing more people of color and more women. So I think that we have come far. And I think that it's going to have a trickle down impact on how far we can come in sports, right? There's going to be this week, I believe, a sort of a panel put together by a group of legislators on the Hill, but it'll also include the likes of Dawn Staley, Nina Chaudhary. And so it's going to when we have people in positions outside of sports, it can impact sports. I think that we are making some movement in terms of diversity in sports, but we've really got a long way to go. I mean, when we look at men's basketball coaches, football coaches at the highest level of college sports, it's unfortunate. The numbers are just dismal. When we look at the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball, the numbers are dismal. But the reality is that we need more, owners, and those owners, majority and minority owners, in those positions where they influence hiring. So I believe that we've made progress. But I think the other thing, Kevin, is sometimes there's progress being made that can't be measured or can't be seen. Like just the mentality of Black and brown male and females now has changed, right? And so it's hard to measure that, but you can feel it, you see it coming. And so hopefully down the line, that's going to translate into some more tangible outcomes that we can see and that we can measure.
And Emmett, I'm curious to dive a little bit deeper into the coaching inequities in professional sports. If you look at the NFL, most of their players, I think that's 75 to 80% are Black, but you only have 2 Black head coaches, and you've got 2 other minorities in Robert Saleh and Ron Rivera. And when you look at the NBA, again, most of their players are African American. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we promote more opportunities for African American coaches and executives as well.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, I think I wrote a piece not too long ago, and I think it was primarily aimed at college, but the same could be said for the professional ranks. And, some of these numbers aren't going to change. The Rooney Rule isn't going to change everything, right? A Russell rule in college athletics isn't going to change anything. The athletes are going to have to speak up, but that's a challenge, right? Because you've got, whether it's Chris Jackson, when he was with the Nuggets, or Craig Hodges when he was with the Bulls, you know, athletes are great at dealing with the systemic racism and the lack of social justice and diversity outside of sports. But when it comes to inside of sports, that's where we need to become more active so that we increase the number of coaches, who are men and women of color. I mean, it's really unfortunate, even on the football side, when we look at the number of women who have come into coaching and scouting positions, and we look at those women, they're white women. They're not black women. But these are, black women are out there raising, wide receivers and quarterbacks and left guards and left tackles, but they're not getting opportunities. But the players have got to say something about it. Or there has to be an entity developed where the players can voice their opinions and can have an influence, but be protected. And that's the only way that I think it's going to change. You can't legislate morality. So either we're going to have more black and brown, minority and majority owners in sports, or the players are going to have to influence, they're going to have to influence hiring. Because we can even see with the case with Nate McMillan right now. He's doing an outstanding job in Atlanta, but he was run out of Indiana. And so the players have gotta take more of a stand, or entity created to help protect them as they are making a stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm wondering if you think the political culture that we're living in is elevating the urgency for more Black athletes to speak up. And just more broadly, I'm wondering, just for yourself as an African American male, what do you think about the current state of our political culture for African Americans?
Oh, that's a great question. I think our political culture right now is more inviting, for all people, across gender, across race. Right now, Kevin, real talk. I just think that we're just trying to get through. Hopefully we can see the other side of COVID-19. I mean, I think that's where a lot of our nation's interests lie, and I don't think it's any different for um, for athletes. But again, when I see so many firsts, we're still seeing a lot of firsts, whether it's a runoff here, or whether it's, the way that people of color impacted the elections in Atlanta, we're seeing a lot of firsts. And as long as we continue to hear these firsts, I think that it's a it's a situation where we're permeating, we're penetrating, some of the old ways and developing some new ways.
And Emmett, as you know, voting rights are under assault over in the U.S. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the role that athletes have to play to preserve our democracy, because they have the platform to influence a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's the actual legislation, whether it's appeals to the legislation, that again, that's the place where organizations like the Players Coalition, can become involved. I think, Kevin, for athletes to truly impact, um, national issues, like voting rights, I think that we're going to have to see a lot of these individual efforts become more coalesced, and we're going to have to see more coalitions. I've always said that we should have, a political action party, a PAC, just made of athletes, because they have that type of influence. I mean, there are certain folks out there that if you see an athlete with an I voted sticker on, then they're going to go vote. And if kids see athletes with a I voted sticker on them, when they're of age to vote, they're going to vote. And so, one, I think that it's important that to influence voting rights, the athletes form some type of political action committee. Two, I think that more retired athletes need to run for political office. Three, we need a clearinghouse, or we need some type of publication, or we need some type of medium where athletes can be informed of instances where our voting rights are under attack, where lines are being redrawn, where voting boxes and spaces are being taken away, so that they can be informed and affect change. one of the things that I found both with college and professional athletes is they just don't know. They don't have time to know. They have individuals who they trust who should keep them in the know, but those individuals aren't in the know. So we know that information, is power. We know that knowledge is power. And so those are the three things, that I think of when thinking about how athletes can impact voting rights.
And I'm also curious to ask you about educational equality in terms of providing a more equitable opportunities for athletes of color to advance their education and get good paying jobs. How do you think we close that gap and provide better opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm thinking that the college space, with regard to quality education. I'm from North Carolina. I was in North Carolina doing the UNC academic scandal. I remember Proposition 48. I've been a learning specialist, with a Atlantic Coast Conference football team. And Kevin, to be quite honest with you, at the end of the day, that's the family's job. That's the parents' job. There's a reason why, people didn't want slaves to read, and nobody is responsible for that. That is something where I believe in up by the bootstraps. I know the issues are different when we talk about education in urban areas and the quality of education, but there are libraries, there's YouTube. And so I really think when it comes to education, um, that's a personal, family, individual issue where you have to have the discipline and you have to understand the value of it. Now, that's again an area where athletes can help. And I think that athletes are beginning to or continue to show the value of education, whether they're going to schools to read. You had the late Kobe Bryant who was developing children's books. You have a number of athletes who are doing children's books right now or working in that space. And so that's where they can have an influence. But at the end of the day, those junior high, high school, college athletes need somebody to pull them aside. As a matter of fact, Kevin, I'm gonna be transparent. I just had a conversation with a college athlete who didn't turn in a paper, who gave up 10 points, and all they had to do was a video conference. And they told me they were confused by what I meant by a video conference. And I had to sit there and say, are you serious? Are you really serious that you didn't understand that you got 10 points for engaging in a Zoom call with me? I said, you know what? Excuses only sound good to the people who are making them. And by the time we finished the call, he said, you know what? I needed that. I haven't heard that in a while. And so, when it comes to education and me being an educator and someone who graduated from high school with a 1.77 GPA, but found his way to an Ivy League PhD program, that's an individual thing.
And how do you think full inclusion and acceptance and diversity is going to be achieved for Black and minority athletes?
That's a $1 billion question. That's a $1 billion question. And the way I usually answer, especially when I walk in the athletic departments, Kevin, is let's say you win with diversity. Look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the most diverse staff in the NFL, or one of the most diverse staffs in the NFL, and they win championships. And so to answer your question, one of the ways that I think we do that is people see how their organization wins. However they conceptually define or operationally define a win for their organization, when they see that organization down the road that's very diverse and that organization is making the money or they're getting the wins or they're doing whatever it is they do very, very well, I hope that organization that wants to be like them walks down the road and asks them how they do it. And they say, we win with diversity. Because, at the end of the day, that's the language that attracts people to make change. And again, you're not going to legislate it. Quotas aren't going to work. You got to want to do it to make your organization a better organization. And I truly believe that you win with diversity, and promoting wins, however that's defined, is the way to go.
And how do you envision the future for diversity, equity, and inclusion? What's your greatest hope in that area?
I don't know. I really don't know, especially when we talk about it in sports, because we have so many, We have so many organizations, especially on the college level, right? After George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, everybody wanted to hire a diversity and equity, a D, E, and I, professional. And often they just tack that title onto the person of color, who was in administration and athletics. And that's not the way to go about it. A lot of them, every time something happens, they want to put out a statement. Our organization put out a call to do a report on social justice and inclusion task forces with Division I athletic programs. We only got 18 responses out of 65, right? And so, I'm optimistic that it's going to happen in some spaces, but in other spaces, it's just not happening. I mean, that number that I just quoted, to 18 out of 65 Division I schools turned in a social justice or what they're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. The Southeastern Athletic Conference, not one school returned a report. And so I think it's happening in certain places, like the Pac-12 is happening. I think it's happening in certain places like the Big Ten, but in certain places, people just don't get it. And until the athletes stand up and say something, they're not going to get it and they're not going to do anything. But we'll see. It's going to be interesting, especially with this in the year 2022, in terms of coaching, administrators, owners. It's going to be interesting if we can carry the momentum that we developed in 2021.
Emmett, I've got two more questions for you. The first is, are you worried about the current state of American democracy and how that may affect progress moving forward?
I have a positive outlook on our American democracy. I'm just concerned about the threats to it. Whether they're technological threats, whether there's misinformation, whether it's social media. And I think we need to continue to address those things. But, again, when we look at what happened this past election, not just on the national level, but the state by state level, I think that what we've done to try our best to preserve democracy is continuing to be in the right direction. But threats are everywhere. Threats are everywhere. And I think that, in particular, Black and brown folks need to be cognizant of those threats, because they're different than the threats of the past. But I have a positive outlook in terms of our democracy. And I'm really excited about our administration, in particular, what SCOTUS ruled in the Austin case, and, providing some more opportunities for college athletes. I figure if the Supreme Court can come around to athletes and need more educational benefits, then not only is our democracy in pretty decent shape, but so is our judicial system.
And my final question for you, Emmett, if people want to get involved with athletes, advocates, in social justice in sports, what's the best way they can do that?
Hey, just hit me up, Emmett Gill at socialjusticeandsports.org, or visit our website, www.socialjusticeandsports.org. We host about 5 to 7 interns per academic year. We're always looking for volunteers that can, help us with our work, whether it's the report writing, whether it's to open the door of a sports team or a legislator. Hey, we look for donations as well. We're a nonprofit organization. And I think that, we hope that more people get involved in the work, Kevin, because sports gives us so much, right? I'm so looking forward, to the game tonight between, Phoenix and LA. Sports gives us so much. And we give sports stuff, but we can give, more than our ticket money or our popcorn money, or our parking money, or our jersey money. And I'm hoping some folks out there who hear your incredible work will decide to do some volunteer work with us.
Yeah, volunteering is the heart of progress sometimes, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. Hey, Emmett, I really want to thank you for in-depth discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion in sports. I want to commend you for the work that you do through your organization, and I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Hey, Kevin, I appreciate it. You keep up all the outstanding things you're doing. You're godsend to what folks like me try to do, and I'm just so blessed that you took the opportunity to speak with me today.